Meeting of the Minnesota chapter of the SIP. We couldn't quite get our act together last month, so I apologize for that. Normally September is the first month that we get busy. Slowly but surely, we are lining up some good programs. Next month we're going to have the people from the DNR talking about the Hen Lake fire, and in particular about how well that sprinkler system works that you put on your roof. And we're going to have some photographs. We're going to have somebody from the DNR talking about that. It's a very apropos topic with the wildfires going on in California. It's definitely something that I thought we would want to hear about. We won't have a meeting in December as usual. We will be inviting our state fire marshal again for our January meeting. February, we're looking, Tom and Tel is putting together the people from the Fire Alarm Association to do another one of those mini, 3 different manufacturers, 3 different projects, 15 minutes each. Let's have a look at their stuff and do that in February. And in March, I'm really pleased to announce that we are actually going to be able to get Russ Levitt here to talk about the IPA 25, of which he has been the grandfather or the father, if you want to call it. So I was really pleased that Russ was willing to come out and do that. I haven't looked beyond that point yet. I'm actually quite pleased that we're at that point right now, because a month ago I was like, what are we doing this year? So it's coming together. I also must thank you guys for all coming out, even though it is Halloween. A lot of people have not come out because of that reason. I apologize for not having it last week. The tent out front was the only place available. We've been in the tent before. You cannot have a discussion in the tent. There's just, from a voice point of view, it's just not audible. So it became tonight. So I do apologize for it to be Halloween, and thank you for coming out in spite of it. The topic that we're going to discuss tonight, and actually before we get into that, I believe Scott has a brief governor's report. You want to do that real quick? And then, gentlemen, if you want to take place behind the table here, we can see you.
Just a couple of real brief things. The Governor's Council continues to meet every other month, and I am a member of the executive committee, and the executive committee met a few weeks ago, a few days ago actually. We're looking at our year coming up and trying to, as our group is here, trying to review our bylaws and probably update the Governor's Council bylaws, update the roster and make sure we've got several groups are not participating as they should. I find a way to get those to participate. For those of you that aren't familiar, let's see how quickly I can find it. Oh, not quickly. What it's going to tell you is who the members are of the Governor's Council. But our group, the Minnesota Fire Protection Council, is one of the founding members. The Fire Marshal Association, Minnesota, the Minnesota chapter of the International Association of Arson Investigators, Fire Protection Council, Professional Firefighters, State Fire Chiefs, State Fire Department Association, Fire Instructors Association, Hennepin County Medical Center, Burn Center, the Minnesota Safety Council, the League of Cities, and the Minnesota Association of Townships. So it's quite a rounded group of people that have a varied interest in fire, certainly fire safety and fire protection. So we're trying to make sure that everybody continues to join the meetings. We're also looking at the preparation of the 2007 annual report to the vote of the commissioner, and we'll have a draft of that at our next meeting here, and I can talk about that, or maybe I'll forward a copy to Ed, and then he can send it around if you'd like. We're looking at our 2008 goals and projects, and probably besides continuing the Governor's Fire Prevention Day at the Fair, which has been an outstanding success again this year, 9th year. We're looking at trying to move forward the statewide building code. The Governor's Council doesn't really have an ability to do that, but we have the ability to bring all the information together and then take it to our groups and try to get our groups to push it in one direction or another. And the majority of us on the Governor's Council feel it's important that we get a building code statewide. Will Berger with the, I didn't mention the AIA, architects are in it too. Oh, they weren't on the original bylaw, that's why. Will Berger put a white paper together last year, and we actually thought it was going to go forward. I talked about it last year in here, but it got waylaid in the legislative process. So those are a couple of the things that we only are going to pick 3 or 4 or 5 things, 2 or 3 or 4 things that we can work on, and those are a couple of them. The other thing that we worked on this year was the Deputy State Fire Marshal Dan Bernardi has been putting together and yes, Jerry Rosendahl, not really pushing because that's not his job, but kind of pushing a fire zone, which would be unique. There's 2 or 3 others in the country area at maybe the Mall of America where there would be a lot of fire safety instruction, and it would be probably promoted by the Insurance Federation or an insurance company or something like that. But there's one in New York and there's one at in Disney World. Epcot, I think, is where it's at, and they're really very interesting educational facilities. Again, the Governor's Council is not going to push an issue like that, but we're just trying to gather information to see if it's something that there might be groups that would be interested in following through with that, pushing it. We're really interested in getting information from this group. If anybody's got something that they'd like to have presented at the Governor's Council, let me know. Jeff Shadig, in conjunction with our group, put together a great form to use to get information from our group to the Governor's Council and back. And we just talked about that again at the Executive Committee meeting and how we do want to do that. Jerry Rosendahl is now, the Fire Marshal's office has taken over the secretarial duties, administrative duties, that go along with the Governor's Council. They've taken that back over, and Jerry's working to get things going so that we'll actually see the meeting minutes a few weeks after our meeting. We can forward them to each group. Each group can disseminate them as they want to, and then we'd like to have some feedback. So if you've got something that you think is important, legislatively or other, or program ideas, let us know. But as a brief report, there's no real legislative update at this point. At least that's not my strong suit, so I don't know if John or Jeff has anything legislatively they want to talk about or worry about. That's it.
Well, thank you very much. I think what has been happening in the industry throughout the country is that there's a recognition that obviously the older group of people will be leaving the industry sooner or later, probably within the next 5, 10, 15 years. And there is a new group of people. Tony is probably a good representative of that. Another young gentleman from 3M behind you, that will be taking our places at some point in time. And as that, that takes place not only in our community, but it also takes place in the fire departments, it takes place in the, in the authorities of the jurisdiction, the insurance people, basically everywhere. And because this is changing, we're beginning to find out that some of the things that we all created back in the 80s are not really standing up to scrutiny today. We do things different. We have young people coming up that need a career path. And as such, the discussion becomes, and of course, going back 30 years when, the only time you installed a sprinkler system was in the insurance company twisted your arm and said, we're not insuring you anymore unless you have it. We actually had to go out and sell sprinkler systems. We don't do that anymore because the building codes now require in most buildings to have a fire protection system. So the nature of what we do has changed from building protection to life safety, etc. As part of that, more and more people are talking about change. As I told the gentleman before, I'm on the NICET committee to rewrite the entire NICET exams. Again, we found out that the exams were just simply not holding up to scrutiny anymore these days. The way that we did it back in the 80s is not the way we can now do it in the 2000s. So, and also, a whole new group, we're no longer preaching to people that have been in the industry for 15 years before NICET ever developed the first set of questions. We're talking about people like Paul. We're talking about people that come into the industry and need to have a pathway, a career ahead of them, where they can go from this level to this level to this level. Along with the complexity of the number of different sprinklers, the fire testing that's being done, the new resources being done by NIST, we're changing. And as part of that, the question really comes up, and the question that I believe was first posted by a group of people on the Fire Council, Gordy Bass is part of that. I became aware of that when I was sent an email that said, can you please send this out to everybody? We'd like to have an opinion on whether or not, plan reviewers and maybe designers need to have a little higher level of recognition and a little higher level of certification. We're not really comfortable with the way that plan review is being done necessarily by everyone. Or the new email that came out today from the State Fire Marshal's office pointing out how many mistakes there are in hydraulic calculations that are being submitted. So at NYSA, we're sitting around the table, it's a bunch of gray-haired guys, and we're saying, no, I'm sorry, we're still going to do manual hydraulic calculations as part of the exam. If you don't understand it, the computer is going to give you junk, you don't know the difference. And the Fire Marshal's office just confirmed that today. I passed it on to NYSA, by the way. They said, thank you very much. They're now going to use that as an example as to why things need to change. As part of that, I had asked a number of people to participate today, and I'm really pleased that they have been able to come out and support this. Gordon Bates, and I would like you gentlemen to sit behind the table here so we can have a debate. Jeff Shalek, Beaver Grove Heights, John Nisha, and Scott Futrell, and I really appreciate you guys participating in this. I think as an industry, we have to have a discussion as to where we think all this needs to go. And it's just unfortunate for those people that are not here tonight. We're going to pass them by a little bit. What I had asked these gentlemen to do, basically, and I'm not sure, probably you're the closest, is to basically give their own idea as to what they believe is going on, is not right, should be changed, or should not be changed. And of course, as with anything that we do as a society, a lot of these questions are as political as they are fundamental to the industry. Some people feel that they're being stepped on, other people feel that they're taking advantage of, or other people feel that, why are they in my backyard telling me what to do? So you have all these different feelings, and I agree with you that, it would have been much nicer if we had seen 60 people here tonight, because I believe that the subject is that important. It's just unfortunate that the word Halloween kept a few people away, quite a few actually. I got quite a few angry emails saying, hey, why did you guys do this tonight? And I've told quite a few people it was because of the tent, sorry. But that's basically where we're at. I also want to mention to all of you guys that as a board, we have been talking about possibly moving this venue to the Fire Museum, simply because the Fire Museum can use the support, the money that we would bring into that. Also, it would be available at any time that we needed it, so we would not have to wait for someone else to clear this room out. We could have had it last week at the fire hall, but not here. And therefore, I will be sending a questionnaire around again by the same email process, asking people if they support the idea to move to the Fire Museum as a permanent venue for the meetings of the SFPE chapter. And again, we'll see what the reaction is to that. It would be more of a self-catering situation than being served, but the people that are now meeting there, which is among others are the Fire Alarm Association is now meeting at the Fire Museum, are very pleased with the cleanliness, the space of the room, it's well lit. They're very nice people, everybody appreciates them being there, and how easily it's available at short notice. So I just wanted to bring that up. So I've asked these gentlemen to each come up with their position as to what they feel, and then essentially, I believe, we want to open it for debate. If someone else, after these gentlemen are finished, wants to get up and make a statement or bring out his opinion, that's why we're here. We're not here for a one-way conversation. We're here for a back and forth. You want to start with that, John? Thank you very much for coming, John.
Thanks, Ed. I'll start off with a couple of general comments, at least in my position with the State Fire Marshal's Office. We feel that proper installation, proper sprinkler installation relies on three components. It has to be designed correctly, has to be installed correctly, and has to be reviewed correctly. And I talk about it like a three-legged stool. It doesn't work with a two-legged stool or a one-legged stool. But with all three, you can kind of balance it. I like to use a quote that I heard Bill Yorkson he was once a few months ago, and he said, and I have a lot of respect for Bill, so this is meant as a compliment, but he said, the AHJs are the last line of defense if something was wrong. He said, you're the last ones to catch it. And without that critical step, things can fall apart. And I really respect Bill for saying that. And he said, we make mistakes, the designer can make a mistake, the fitter can make a mistake, and this is the last chance before a catastrophic failure to correct it. So to accomplish this, the designer, the installer, and the inspector all have to be competent. Now, where it starts to fall apart is what is everyone's idea of competency. That's where it starts to get a little difficult. I think everyone agrees with that goal statement, but exactly how you accomplish it is where you start to get a divergence of opinion. I happen to work in an office. I do relatively few plan reviews. I maybe do 20 a year. But I work with people who, our office, between the three of them, do 600 to 700 a year. So that's pretty much one a day on average that they're spitting out. They get pretty good at it. I feel really sorry for a local official who's trying to maintain some level of competency doing one every other month, 6 a year, 4 a year. I don't know how you could maintain proficiency, because I know what our 3 plan reviewers wrestle with, and they're seeing things all the time. So I really feel sorry for a city that gets an ESFR with a fire pump, with high pile plastic storage, and no municipal water supply, you know, and they're supposed to do the plan review on that, or God forbid a high rise, that's even more complicated with pumps and everything else in it. So I have some sympathy for them. But by the same token, I also think that the structure allows them the resources for a competent review. If they can't do it, they can farm it out to a third person. They could turn it back over to the state, although I know a lot of them don't want to do that. You could farm it back out to another contractor to review. That's another option. So I don't think that it's, when it says, well, you know, the city tells me I have to do it, and I have to do it. Well, there are options. There's things available. There's tools there. I was thinking about this as I was driving up here today, and I've been doing plan reviews off and on for about 20 years, and I was thinking about some of them that I did back in 1987 or 88, and I used to spend over half the time on spacing issues. Spacing's off. This is wrong. You know. And that's when spacing was pretty cut and dry. 15 by 15 was about it. And sidewalls were relatively new, and you didn't run into them very often. Gordy, jump in if I'm saying anything wrong. You spent about 25% of the time on calcs and about 25% of the time on everything else, the valving, you know, that kind of arrangement, riser. And now what I'm finding is about 60% of the time is spent on calcs, and about 20% of the time is spent on the other issues. Spacing seems to have almost fixed itself. I can't remember the last time I've seen a spacing thing, other than some small room rules, but you know, the 7.5 feet off the wall, or 10 feet off, you just don't see those kinds of issues anymore. At least I don't in the ones that I review. So it's really into the calcs, and Scott, I hope I don't steal into your thunder here, but I'm getting really frustrated with 28-page cut sheets on sprinkler heads. That's
just one head.
And I know that's one of your thunder, Scott, but that is really hard for a reviewer, and I just expressed some pretty pointed frustration to a member of the 13 committee. I said, you guys should not have let go of some of the maximum sprinkler criteria that you used to have in 13 and left it up to each manufacturer. I'm starting to see, albeit not real often, but I'm starting to see jobs where I don't have a single standard head anymore. There's not a 15 by 15 head in the place. It's all extended coverage, it's all sidewalls, and it's all attic heads, and all this special stuff now. And that is it's just absolutely ballooned the amount of time that the plan reviewer has to spend on it. And that's why I keep getting back to the poor AHJ that's told by their city that they have to do this, because it's a revenue source or for whatever reason, or it might be a local controller, I don't know, that absolutely can't keep up with it. And like I say, I have the luxury of working with 3 guys that do this full-time that are very good at it. And I can't imagine what some of these poor locals are doing, seeing these, handful of jobs a year with that kind of complexity. I'll get off my soapbox.
I represent the Fire Marshals Association of Minnesota on the committee that John chairs that's looking at these rules. And it was the contractors and sprinkler fitters who raised the question about AHJ competency, not only plan review, but inspection competencies. And what they were saying is they're running into many examples where their competition is installing substandard systems. And they're getting away with it because of the lack of knowledge on whoever is doing that plan review or the inspection. So it was the industry that really raised the question. Now, as a representative for the Fire Marshals Association, which many of our members actually do plan review and inspection of those systems, I had my opinion of what I thought needed to be done, but to find out what the organization wanted, I sent out a questionnaire. And it's very much like the questionnaire I think that Phil had sent out.
It was yours.
After that.
Yeah,
It's basically rewritten. And out of, 160 members or something like that, the Fire Marshals Association, I got 41 of those surveys returned. And all 41 people said that it was important that sprinkler systems be designed and installed correctly. And then when asked, is it important that the AHJ or somebody else, a government agency, does a review of that design and that installation, they all 41 said yes, that is also important. And so the question was, how do you determine competency of those individuals who are doing that review and the inspections? And 25 people came back and said, those people need to be tested. They need to prove their competency by testing. 15 people said, no, you don't need to test, that just based on their education and experience, they should be able to document that they are competent. Then we also asked the question, what kind of certification proves competency? And it wasn't just, relegated to one certification. Which ones would be considered competency in their minds? A fire protection engineer, 9 people said would be competent. A NICET level 3 or 4 in sprinkler design, 11 individuals said competency. And then 23 people said if the people doing the review and inspections could pass the same test that's required for the contractor to be licensed in the state, they would consider that adequate competency. And then 11 said something other than that, maybe NICET level 2 or something along those lines. So, on that basis, then, FMAM is in agreement that people doing that work need to be competent. And we will not be, raising that question, but when the question does get raised, one of the things that we're going to try to do is, come up with a reasonable means for our membership to be certified if they so choose to do that.
My turn.
It's up to you.
I don't really have a prepared statement. Most of you know I don't have very many opinions, so observations. Thank you. First of all, on the way out the door, Phil said, "Here's the results of the survey." So here's the lead. He already led into it. Here's the survey that came back from this group. There were 27 respondents. I don't know. Maybe you know, Ed, how many were sent out here?
Our email list has about 425 names on it.
I'm assuming
It includes everybody,
Right.
from insurance people to fire marshals to engineers, I mean, sprinkler contractors, anybody who's got anything to do with fire protection.
So we only received 27 responses. Of those 27 responses, I'm not like Gordy, I can't remember all the numbers, so 59% were contractors, 12% were consultants, 12% were HJs, and 17% was insurance. 100% said that the individuals doing plan review or inspection should be competent. 100% said that they believe competency needs to be verified in some manner. 76% said that competency needs to be certified by testing. 71% of those that don't believe, so 24% did not think that competency needed to be certified by testing. And so of that 24%, 71% believed that documented a combination of experience and education is adequate. Then, which of the following existing licenses or certifications do you believe adequately demonstrates competency? A licensed mechanical engineer is 12%, a licensed fire protection engineer was 71%. Nice, I guess I don't know quite how. But NICET, I must have given more, NICET 3 or 4 was 76%, and passing the same or similar test as required for the sprinkler contractor or designer was 82%. So I'm not quite sure. People must have answered those twice. Then there were some other comments. I'm not going to go through those. I think that competency of designers. Let me back up and say that I think competency has to start with engineers. That's not part of this debate. But if the engineer...
We're a chapter of the SFP.
What's that?
We're a chapter of the SFP.
And I like to think that, I like to think that this is a big part of it. If competent engineers were putting out bid documents that had water supplies already determined and the hazards properly classified, then the problems that the designers, the contractors, the inspectors, the installers are having would be minimized. So I think competency starts there on almost every project. Remodeling, new project, whatever. So we're not here to discuss engineers, of which I think most of us would agree there are very few competent ones in Minnesota or anywhere near us. I think we've all seen documents that have been put out that give little or no information in regards to the project at hand, and it only makes bidding apples to apples difficult. These gentlemen up here certainly know what happens when they get a flammable and combustible liquids storage or process building, and it goes out to the low bid contractor.
Oh.
We're not going to get the protection we need.
Oh.
And that's just one example.
Coordinating group 2 is good enough.
Yeah. And that's the truth. I mean,
I've seen it.
I have seen that, but anyway. So we're not here to talk about the engineers. And the State Board of Architects and Engineers don't have any teeth, so I think until let me just say one more thing. In the state of Minnesota, the law is that if it's a design-build project, it has to be signed by a registered engineer. Now, how many of you in your design-build projects have registered engineers sign every one of them? How many have a registered engineer sign any of them? Okay, state law requires that. All right? But there's no Board of Architects and Engineers going out chasing down people that aren't doing it. Okay? So, if engineers were doing their job right, and then doing plan reviews, because that would be part of construction observation. They put a bid document out, they follow it up. It'd make this easier. But aside from that, we've got to have competent designers, and we've got to have competent plan reviewers. And all I can say is education is really important to me. I'm not a very good instructor, but I like to do it. I don't feel like I'm a good instructor, but I really like to do it. And I start my classes out, whether it was the one at Hennepin that I taught or the one that I'm currently teaching for SFPE on the international level. And we say, this class isn't going to turn you into a designer or a plan reviewer or a fire inspector. We can't do that in 32 hours. It's not possible. You're up against people that spend 50 hours a week designing. They know what's going on out there. You can't expect that we're going to teach you in 32 hours and keep you up to date on it. So it's a continuing thing. And I don't know how any of these gentlemen have time to educate themselves at the level, on a continuing basis, that you guys are doing, the designers. You know, and that's the only way you're going to keep up, because we've got between 300 and 400 different models of sprinklers with each manufacturer now. We've got 28 pages on an attic, the new Tyco is 28 pages on the new AP attic sprinkler. And then you've got my favorite, which John's tired of me saying, but that F1 res for reliable. And if it's 4 to 6 inches down, it's one pressure, and if it's 6 to 12 inches down, it's another pressure, the same spacing. What fitter knows that? No fitter knows that. So it's all an education process. And then I guess the last thing I want to say is that if we're going to talk about competency, who's going to define competency? You know, I could go right here. We probably all have a different definition. And certainly you guys are going to have a different definition. How are we going to define it? What's competent? Does competent mean your plan review comes back with no comments? Or does competent mean your plan review comes back with all kinds of comments? Even the little ones that, you know, make us all mad. So who's going to define it? How will it be defined? And I really do think it's different for each one of us. And I would only tag on to something that I think John alluded to, and that is that why are the designs or submittals different for different communities? We see the same contractor with 180 degrees of competency in one design or another, depending on where it goes. So, shouldn't they all be the same? Shouldn't it be the same level that's coming to the State Fire Marshal's office, which is another comment that I heard John say the other day, you know, shouldn't it be the same coming to the State Fire Marshal's office as it is that's going to pick a community? I don't care. I don't have one in mind. East Overshoot, perfect, thank you. And you should. So, there, I just talked.
Lots of lot of familiar faces. I don't think anybody that I have heard or talked about this issue with has any issue with should people be competent for what they do. And the basic question is, should they be certified? And everything these gentlemen have said is absolutely true. And I feel for you guys because I have been doing this for almost 28 years, 23 of it full-time. And I get calls from the people that you guys give plans to. And I get calls from you guys. And I understand that it is all over the board. And I think the big thing that you guys are really good at is knowing how to play the game in the communities you do business in. Because when I do plan review with other people, like Scott says, I have seen different levels of submittals. I have seen different levels of what goes into a permit application. And, you know, from that standpoint, you get used to who you're working with. What Scott said as far as, you know, where does it start? It starts, I don't think with the engineer. You know, I apologize, but I don't see much coming out of engineers. Almost everything I get comes from NICEAD, certified people. And those plans are complete. If there's an issue, it's usually in the interpretation of how do you start your basic design. The flammable liquids question is a big one. For years, ordinary Group 2 has been just fine, and it's not. I wrestled with the help of Scott and Rich Pearson and IGH Cenex distribution center in which they package flammable liquids. And in that process went through 8 different design professionals that all tried to give me different things and say this is okay. I got mix and match out of the Uniform Fire Code, out of the NFPA standards, out of different versions of NFPA standards, out of FM documents, out of documents from Europe. I got nobody that I felt really understood what we were asking for. In the end, we ended up with a product that I believe works. It took 12 years. So it takes me 12 years to educate the design professionals on flammable liquids. We've got a long way to go. But it's the same thing, you know. It starts with you guys and then it ends with us. And as you know, fire inspectors and fire marshals are all over the spectrum. And it's difficult for most communities. I just want to read an email that I sent to John and Gordy, and, you know, in response to what we got, because I think it sums it up. And when I put it together, I talked to 25 or 30 different people. And basically, I started out with thanks for asking. You know, for once, somebody came out and asked us the question. And I fully support competency in education, but I'm skeptical about required certifications. The current law requires that a person doing plan review and inspection be competent. Further, we are required to provide documentation of education and experience to the State Fire Marshal's Office in order to be recognized as the plan reviewer and permit authority in our city. This authority is granted to the individual and not to the city, so if the individual leaves the city, the new person must also prove competency. I would argue that to stay competent, there must be continuing education, because that's the one thing that we don't have to prove back to the State Fire Marshal's Office right now is continuing education. And we've talked about it, and the standard, I think, was that we had to do it. It's just never been asked for. And I don't think there's anybody on our end that wouldn't do the continuing education and probably hasn't done it and wouldn't give the documentation back. Minnesota State Fire Code Section 104.2 states the fire official is authorized to receive application, review construction documents, and issue permits for construction regulated by this code. Issue permits for operations regulated by this code, inspect premises for which permits have been issued, and enforce compliance with the provisions of this code. Sprinkler systems are regulated by the fire code, therefore this is our authority. And one of the questions in there dealt with, you know, with our authority. Certification and passing a test will not correct the problems faced by the contractor. We all know that there are persons that can pass a test that do not have the skills to make them competent. You deal with them every day, I deal with them every day. So certification isn't going to solve the problem. There are also persons that work off the cuz rule, because I said so rather than the code. These persons will not be changed because they have a certification. They can pass a test probably better than I can, but they're still going to do whatever they want to do. If there's an issue, the contractor should speak to the individual supervisor and/or appeal decisions as allowed by the code. We all have appeals processes. We all have bosses. I empathize with the sprinkler industry, but feel that there are enough regulations in place at this time. In the interest of public safety, we do not need to make this a certification resulting in the loss of inspections at the local level. We need to provide more and free education and assist those who need it within our own profession. Perhaps we can bring back the code review and discussion portion of the Fire Marshals Association of Minnesota meetings that we used to have. And finally, sprinkler contractors and engineers should join the FMAM as associate members and bring their issues to our table. I think the solution is not certification. If we put certification in place, we're going to do public safety a disservice, because there's going to be more people who don't do it at all. And it's all going to go back to someone else, possibly, or possibly won't get done by anybody. But it's going to result in fewer inspections. And I guess personally, I think there's a lot of education out there, but a lot of small communities can't afford it. They can't afford the $375 to $485 NFPA code class that comes out. They can't afford to spend the money it takes to, well, we don't qualify to go take the NICET certifications anyways. You've got to be working in your industry in order to do that. So the key is to get the people with the knowledge together with the people who need it, free, and to bring your issues to our table and discuss them. One of the things that I really appreciated, and it really opened my eyes about 20 years ago, was when the National Sprinkler Association offered to put anybody in the AHJ's shoes that wanted to on their mailing list as a member. And for probably 8 or 10 years, I got all of the mailings and everything that came out of the National Sprinkler Association. And to read those and to see the other side of the coin. What was really an eye-opener on my side. Then the other thing that really helped a lot was getting involved with Governor's Council and sitting on that organization next to Scott and Phil and engineers and architects and, talk about what their issues are. Because we see one side of the coin. We see the fires, we see people dying in fires, we see our firefighters getting injured and having problems. And we become, a lot of times as fire inspectors, these little soapbox creatures that really super believe in what we do, but we don't always necessarily have the tools to do it. And when you get into the real world, just like with any other profession, and have to sit with people on the other side of the table and have a meaningful discussion, share education and solve a problem, you learn a lot. And I think we can do that. I think we have the associations to handle it. But to do a certification and have people just go take a test, if they took a class, they took a test. They had to pass that test in order to get the certificate that they provide to John to show that they're competent right now. And we have an issue. So to take a certification and get a license isn't going to solve the issue. Education.
Yes, rebuttal?
Well, I have to disagree with Jeff. I believe a certification is necessary in order to have somebody be able to show that they have competence. We get back to the old word competency again. Like you said, that somebody may have taken a class and passed a test, how many years ago? How long, 15 years ago?
20 years ago.
Yeah. One of the things that my brother would show up till, back when the licensing law came into effect, this is a 1991 edition of NFPA 13. This is what was in effect. So if you showed certification at that point, you could be, very competent in the use of this document. Now if we take a look, what has happened? This is the 2002 edition. It is a lot thicker. Now granted, you had some documents like 231 and 231C got incorporated in here, but that would not account for the size of this document. Now we go to 2007, even bigger. They're working on the 2010. Next week, the committee meetings start on the 2010 edition. So you could have somebody who got certified or competent 15 years ago when this went into effect, had no continuing education, and they are not going to be able to deal with the issues of hydraulic calculations or all the various types of sprinkler heads and things like that. And by requiring somebody to have a certification, I'll grant you that you may be forcing some of these individuals or maybe some of the cities out of that business of doing plan review or sprinkler inspection. They may not be getting that revenue. That's true, but there are other avenues. They can defer to the state. The state will do the plan review and inspection for any city that isn't doing it, or it can be subbed out to, somebody who contracts to do that type of work. So maybe some of these smaller towns need to get out of the business because they don't see enough of these systems to stay current. So that's where my good friend Jeff and I part ways, I guess. I think certification is necessary.
Certification with continuing education?
Yes, correct.
And I'd have to say that everything Gordy says applies to our design community. I mean, we've got designers out there with 30 or 35 years experience that we don't see at these meetings. I don't see them at SFPE. They're not getting continuing education. I can give you examples if you want of somebody that still doesn't put T's and right to nipples and doesn't put the drops in because that's the way they started and they're not going to change. So there's a designer. And so the point is...
Dry sidewalls.
Dry sidewalls, he says. The point is, everything Gordy says applies to our designers too. And maybe a little less so because if they're doing it 40 or 50 hours a week, they're still got their hands in it all the time. But you can't ignore the continuing education responsibility. And even if you got a nice at 3 or 4, you've got to have continuing education.
I would like to add a little bit to that debate, because I'm representing at the national level at NICET, and we've been discussing this now for almost a year. And exactly what we're talking about is that the level of competency needs to be raised, and we're talking exactly about the design community. And that does not mean that we want to reduce access, we want to improve access. In other words, we want to make the barriers to certification lower by being more reasonable as to what the questions are. The questions are pertinent, they're to the code, they're to the competency of the individual. There are no trick questions, no trying to fake anything. But what we have found over the years, and this is a national consent, and this is another part, the reason why NICET is making all these changes to the examination structure, is that too many people have played loose and fast with the rules in order to get their NICET 3 to get their license, their state license. They're not designers, they don't spend 2,000 hours a year behind the board. They're business owners that have somebody else sign off on them. They don't necessarily have the competency. The other problem that we see in national level is that a lot more people that start, young people that start in the industry, are only given a year to 2 years of practice before they now become the estimator. And they leave the design profession, but yet, at some point, they want to be a business owner, now they need the NICET 3 certification, but they can't prove their competency. So what we're talking about, and I just like to explain it, and we'll get back to this, because it all, what I've heard these gentlemen say here, that we don't really trust the competency of the examinations as they are right now. And that has been recognized, that trust needs to be increased by making those examinations more pertinent to what's happening today. And to allow people that do the examinations to use their experience rather than their ability to open up a code book and find exactly where it's written. So those new tests that are going to be constructed, we're starting with that in January for the next half year, will be based directly on ability and skill and experience at the various levels as you go through the stages. The other thing that's being talked about is something that's called Certified Managing Employee. And what that is all about is that there is a recognition that over the past 20 years, a number of holes have opened up. People don't fit. The round pin doesn't fit the square hole doesn't fit the round. So with other words, as the industry has grown, there has become a need. Gaps have opened up that need to be filled. And again, we're talking about the CME certification as CME 1 is 13D. Anybody who wants to install a residential sprinkler system and proves that he can pass a CME 1 test is allowed to install a home, but that's all he's allowed to do. Can't inspect regular 13 sprinkler systems, can't go into an apartment building and dig around. Only allowed to do home. So they could be plumbers, because the moment they pass the test, they're no longer a plumber, they're now a fire protection, a certified fire protection guy. So the idea is not to keep people out, the idea is to open the door, but to force them to prove that they know the subject on which they're going to practice. Level 2 is 13R apartment buildings and residential. Level 3 would then be NFPA 13 with everything that comes along with it, special hazards, etc. But these people don't have to sit behind the design office. They don't have to be designers, they have to hire designers. They have to hire people like Scott and myself, independent designers. They have to get the competency hired into their operation. They don't have to be it themselves. So they could be state certified as a level 1, as a level 2, or as a level 3. And the state would have the knowledge that these are responsible individuals that will bring the competency into their operation to perform these. So what I hear this gentleman say here is that there is a concern that there are people out there right now, and it sounds like nationally that's fully agreed to. There are people out there now who have a NICET 3 or 4 certification who don't necessarily, for lack of continuing education or whatever it is, are competent to where we need them to be to help these gentlemen out in making sure that they get competent plans presented to them. There's certainly not enough of them. There's certainly not enough of them, which is another big part of the problem. So I personally believe that certification could be a requirement provided that the certification test is fair and honest and test those skills that that person needs. And I agree with Scott, it's very difficult to define what that competency is. It definitely is very hard to do that. Which is demonstrated by the fact that we are recognizing that there are certain levels of competency, 1 through 4, or CME 1 through 3. And different people for different holes, a round peg and a round hole, a square peg and a square hole. There is much more diversity now than there used to be 20 or 30 years ago. So nationally, that's where it's going. And the other thing I explained to Tony when he asked me the question earlier today is that what has been found is that the modular system of asking 5 questions on one subject, with all the questions having the same weight, no longer applies. It's not good enough for ANSI, it's not good enough for the national certification authorities, and NISET is being pulled into the 20th century whether they like it or not. So the testing modules go away, and it will be a sit-down computerized test, which with a computer can have photographs. Okay, you can show a storage array and you can ask the person whether they know what that is. Okay? You can do things now with a computer that you could never do before. So it becomes much more of an experience and a competency test rather than book reading. But you have to apply the book to the facts, to what you're being, whether it's drawings or calculations or. So what we're saying is that we as a group are very excited with where this is all going. We think that we're going to be able to bring up the level of competency and provide significant avenues for the young generation that's coming up to have a career path. So from my point of view, this is very interesting. Jeff, that was absolutely wonderful thought as to how you described your ideas. I could see your point. And I could see, for instance, I live in St. Augusta, volunteer fire department. One of those guys worked for me for a while. He's now decided to leave. But we all know that a small town volunteer fire department has absolutely no chance of being knowledgeable in that area or to have the money. I mean, they do tea parties, for God's sakes, to raise the funds to put fuel in the truck. That's about what you're saying. And a lot of communities are like that. We're not all St. Cloud, we're not all Minneapolis. I do believe, Scott, can you maybe back me up on that? The various AFSA, NFSA, SFPE, a lot of people are providing free or very low cost. I know at the AFSA conventions, the ASJs come in free.
Most of the continuing education that I'm aware of from both SFPE and NFSA is not free. The online seminars,
those guys are not. But at the conventions, you can pick up free seminars if you're an ASJ. But you've got to be physically there to do that. Insurance guy.
Oh, no, don't use that evil word, I'm a consultant. I spent 25 years in insurance, so. Tom March, I'm with Goldberg's Consultants, and I've got a very long laundry list, comments, questions, observations that this whole topic raises. So I'll just throw some of these out. Maybe I should have had another chair up here. I'd be glad to contribute to this. But I've got a very long list of items here. And I want to start with Scott's comment, which is exactly where I would have started. I do plan reviews for Fortune 500 companies at locations around the world. So my first question is, who wants to certify me for 50 states and 100 countries? And God knows how many different kinds of codes. But your point about engineering and the first person that puts those plans together is the most valid point that's been made tonight. Because adding another level of certification is like adding another gun law in this country. We've got about 10,000 of them, and adding one more does nothing for the problem. And the first question I'd ask is, what is exactly the fire we're trying to put out here? Yes, we all have issues with plan reviews. I did a plan review the other day that had been stamped by the AHJ. It had been stamped by the licensed engineer. And when I called them up and said, we can't accept this, they said, why not? I said, well, you designed this per NFPA 231C. All right, because that local jurisdiction and their code referenced 231C. That's how outdated it was. They didn't, I can't mention the particular problems as we deal with customer, and I don't want to get into that. But this customer deals with this all around the country with that type of issue. Another set of plans came in, reviewed by the engineer, licensed PE, reviewed by the designer. Because of our intimacy with the customer, and that's one of the problems I see most often, is we want to review something for a set of specifications or a code, but it very rarely, or very often, has nothing to do with the actual risk that is at hand. In other words, they're meeting minimum standard, but it's got nothing to do with preventing loss. They just want to meet the intent, or excuse me, the letter of the law. But in this particular case, we had a water test that without our knowledge of what was going on, nobody would have discovered that the static pressure was taken on one city supply and the residual was taken on another. All right? What is a code, what is a plan where you do that for that? Now, my issue is there's a lot of people reviewing plans for a lot of different reasons. So who's going to be the final authority? I quite often have a set of plans, as I've noted, with several sets of stamps on them already. And for one particular customer, after they've been reviewed by the AHJ and submitted by a registered PE or a licensed or certified individual at some point, for that particular customer, we reject 40% of the plans that cross our desk because they don't meet the customer's needs, which are more stringent than the standards that we're reviewing them against. So, that raises a whole slew of issues there. And if we're going to have multiple authorities or multiple interested parties looking at this, who's the final say? Again, I'm looking at it from the customer's perspective. I've been hired by them to look out for their interests, which again go far beyond many codes quite often. In other instances, the codes are outdated or irrelevant because, as I've noted, 231C is a perfect example of what we often see. And again, those customers may be located around the country. So I have a set of plans hit my desk. I'm sitting here in Minnesota. Am I now not certified because this facility is located in California? I could go on. I've got a lot more examples, but my point is I totally agree with a lot of the points on both sides of the issue that are being made up here. But I'm not sure another level of certification when we're already saying we've got to have registered PEs designing these systems or stamping off on them. We've got to have NICEP level, various levels in various jurisdictions, installing these things, designing them, being involved in it. What's the problem we're going to solve? And one last example I'll give is I just went out to a facility that was built in the last 12 months here in Minnesota. It was approved by multiple levels. They had a flammable liquids issue, which was a great example. And it was designed for flammable liquids. However, it was designed for flammable liquids stored 4 feet high, and they had 20-foot high racks in this building. They had a sheet metal wall between that and the next warehouse. They had no diking, they had no drainage. A lot of things, nothing to do with the sprinkler system. There's a lot bigger issues here than just saying, I've looked at a set of sprinkler plans and now my building is properly protected. So I think we've got to take a step back before we say, let's put another level of certification, another requirement for another individual to be certified, because when those companies get that stamp that says it's okay, they go ahead and build them. And it takes, if I can paraphrase, it takes a whole village to raise an idiot sometimes. It takes a whole lot of people with a lot of varied interests being involved in this. I don't think we can say, let's take one individual and have them stamp it, and now we've solved the problem, because it's kind of getting back to that gun law problem. If we just pass another gun law, we'll solve the crime problem in the U.S. We've got to have the education that was mentioned. We've got to have the oversight that was mentioned. When we see issues like we're supposed to have registered PE stamping off on this, let's not pass another law to say let's get somebody else certified. Let's go back and enforce the laws that are in place and say that registered PE didn't do his job. Why is he still a registered PE in Minnesota?
You just opened up another whole
Nothing
right there.
The certification we're talking about would not apply to plan reviewers in the private sector. It's strictly the people who are doing plan review for permits in fire code and building code systems for the state of Minnesota. So it comes from a law that's already in place. There's a set of rules that probably weren't written quite right to start with. And trying to solve that problem is who at a municipality or a state level is competent. And like Jeff said, that the fire code may give you the authority and the badge may give you the authority to do plan review, but it doesn't give you the knowledge or the competency. And that's what we're trying to find, is we see enough problems coming through either due to lack of education or a designer trying to get a job done too quickly. Or I've had a contractor tell me, he says, we design a system based on where that system's going to be installed, based on the level of inspection that it gets, because that's what my competition is doing. Is I'm not in the business because I like sprinkler heads and pipe and fittings. I need to make money to stay in business. So if he's bidding a project and doing work in a certain area, and they know that there's very little supervision, what he has to do to be competitive is lower that, design and that installation to that level. And there's an old saying that is that you don't get what you expect, you get what you inspect. And that's what we're trying to do, is we think we need to raise the level of some of the people doing the plan review and inspections for municipalities in the state. So the intent isn't to filter out into the private sector and have requirements there.
Jeff, and then you.
And Gordy, I fully agree with you. However, a certification isn't going to do that. In your example, I was part of the original group. I was the registered lobbyist for the Fire Marshals Association when we passed the original sprinkler licensing law. And we have licensed contractors, licensed designers, licensed managing people that are out there, and we haven't solved the problem with their certification, I hear you saying. So we're not going to solve the problem with a certification on our end. We're going to solve it with education. And one of the big problems that I see is that education has become the source of money for most of our organizations, whether it's this one or FMAM or the Minnesota chapter of the IAI. Everybody needs money, and we're relying on a lot of our educational programs to get money. So when you put those educational programs, and I'll give you an example. In 1978 or 79, the first sprinkler program that I went to was a joint effort between the National Fire Sprinkler Association, the State Fire Chiefs Association, and Eagle Fire Protection. And that room, they sent out an invitation, it was free education. That room had 135 people in it. That was the first time I had ever even heard of fire inspection. And
I really bored with that.
were you back then? It wasn't much hydraulic inspection, but Chuck Robb was there, Mr. Olson was there, and at the end of the meeting, it was a lot of people got a lot of education. And Mr. Olson said, and you guys want to see more of this stuff, you can come out in the back of my shop. I've got sprinkler stuff set up that I can teach fire departments and fire inspectors. We're not doing that anymore. You talk about the new guys that are coming up, whether it's my industry or your industry. I don't believe we're doing the right job in nurturing these guys and in training them, male or female, because it's a profit center. Education is a profit center. We've got to lose that thought, and we've got to get back to education. And there's nobody in a better position than you guys to educate us. The Fire Alarm Association used to do a lot of stuff and invite us, and now it comes with a $135 price tag. East Overshoe, Minnesota is not going to spend $135 to send the guy out to do this. He might be able to go if it's free. Because, like Ed said, they don't have money to put gas in their trunks. The argument that should they not be doing fire sprinkler, plan reviews, that's a good argument too. But the reality is there's nobody else in that community that's doing it. And you can send a plan review to the state fire marshal's office, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys aren't doing inspections on every single plan that comes across your desk. If we issue a permit, we at least go out and do an inspection. The biggest reason the community wants to do inspections is not necessarily to oversee your work and to decide, to see whether you've done your job correctly. It's to make sure that the pieces of that fire sprinkler system that are there for firefighter use are done in accordance with our SOPs. Is the fire department connection in the right place? Is it close enough to a hydrant that our standard hose lays can hit it? You know, and those are the things that the small fire department is looking at. Granted, the level of expertise in plan review is all over the place. And we have to prove competency to the state fire marshal, and that's done through education. So, you know, we come out with some sort of a plan set as to what that competency means, and we live with it. If that's not good enough, we raise it up. But the bottom line is that the fire inspector in East Overshoe, Minnesota, wants to make sure that those things that his department has to interface with are correct. They might not be looking at your calculations. They might not be looking at, you know, your inputs and outputs. They might not have the education to do that. But what they're looking at is the pieces of the fire code that they're responsible for in their communities. You know, and it's up to us, as the people who've been around doing this for 25 to 30 years, to go out and grab those people, educate them, teach them that, you know, that this is important. This is why it's important. You got to do more than you're doing right now. And then when they do it, you got to not beat them over the head when they ask for a set of plans.
You want to respond right now, or do you want to get in there first?
Go ahead.
Has anyone thought of or researched if there are any other cities or states in the country that do have any programs in place for inspectors and plan reviewers, and how those plans are faring as far as are they working, aren't they working, and what are they, if they do have some plans in place for certification of plan reviewers and inspectors, how do they do it, and that type of thing. Has any of that taken place? I'm just curious.
I did a search on the internet, you know, with that question, and the best I could find, I expected to find a lot more information than I did. And I don't know why, whether it's my inability to operate the computer or whatever. Could be. What I found was about 13 states required certification of plan reviewers, and about 17 required certification of inspectors. And the only state I could find any information on was the state of Colorado. They had passed the law maybe 12 years ago requiring this. And then they had a sunset that after so many years, they had to go back and revisit whether that program was working or not. And that was the information I actually found, is that they went back and basically quizzed the contractors that were working in Colorado and the AHJs who were doing the inspections and plan review, and they came to the conclusion that it had raised the level of the quality of sprinkler systems. So they decided to continue, that law and the required certification. I did talk to the woman at the State Fire Marshal's office who headed up that program, and they do require certification by way of a test. So if you want to do that work, you need to take a test, you get certified, and she thought that it was working well.
I have a couple, other comments that have kind of come about here in some of the dialogue that's gone on here. I'd like to make my first one is, I'm probably going to get on the soapbox a little bit, because as Jeff says, we do so well in this business, but understand first that this is the fire protection business. You're not selling vinyl siding or aluminum gutters or blacktop overcoats. When you make a mistake, a building can burn down, or, God forbid, people can die. So there's a fundamental difference there. Okay? Somebody puts my gutters on wrong, they fall off. Oh well. They don't seal my blacktop just right. Oh well, I'll have to do it another year. That's a whole lot different than the systems that I'm speaking now to contractors. I know not everyone in the room is a contractor, but it's a whole different set of expectations. Aside from that, the systems that you're installing now are expected to work for 30 to 50 years. I don't buy a car expecting it to last 30 or 50 years. I don't even buy a house expecting it to last. I've never lived in one house for more than 15 years of my life. So we have a very, very high level of expectation with fire protection system. All right, so I just want to frame that so nobody loses that point. Now my second one, getting more into some of the technical things. Our rules and our statute right now in fire protection licensing require competency. It does not define that. And I'm going to sound a little selfish in this comment, and I apologize if it comes off that way because it's not intended, but the determination of competency comes down to me. And frankly, I don't like being put in that position. I have nothing to go by, no standards with which to judge somebody by. The way it is now, it's like, well, I think Gordon's pretty good. I took a class from him, so yeah, he'll be competent. Scott, I've known him for about 20 years now. He seems to know what he's doing, so I think I would prove him to be an AHJ. Jeff, I've seen his resume. It's pretty impressive. I'm pretty comfortable with that. But what we're seeing right now is that, and it's always been that way, and maybe it's just exacerbated with the rules, is receiving permit money can become a cash cow for municipality. I got 4 of them right now, all clustered in the same area of the state, about an hour outside the cities, that now want to be the AHJs to do plan review, because each one of them has a big project coming in. A 400,000 square foot building or something, and they want that because they want that revenue source. And they're seeing their ship come in, they're seeing money coming in. And then when I say, well, what training have you taken in sprinklers? Well, I went to a class that I think the code people came on where sprinklers are required in the building. I said, would you know the difference between a quick response and a sidewall head? No. Do you understand hydraulic calculations? No. What's the sum total of the training you've had on anything related to sprinklers? 3 hours. And I have to tell them, no, they're not competent. And whether they like hearing or not, that's against tremendous political pressure, because the next call I'm going to get is from the city manager, the next call is going to be from the mayor, and the next call is going to be from the state senator or representative or whoever. And the first thing they throw in our face is, you don't have any standards. This is an arbitrary and capricious decision you're making. And, like I say, that may sound terribly selfish, but that is reality. And that's what's going on out there right now. And I say, show me the competence. And if they don't have it, they're saying no, but it's a difficult situation to be put in. So, I want to say something else that kind of takes on, I can't remember who brought this point up, but I learned from some people in the fire protection industry who I hold very high respect. Phil Carlson, Dale Deal, some of his names may resonate with people who really kind of, as a rookie fire inspector, grabbed me by the collar and said, let me show you what the inside of a dry pipe valve looks like, and really learn. The concern I'm having right now is we have a whole bunch of people, and speaking out primarily about designers, that can put out a set of drawings but don't know when there's something wrong. That's what the calcs spit out, so that's where it is. And I remember a guy by the name of Bud Nelson, who was with NIST for a number of years. Some of you may know that name. Bud had a saying that if the answer defies the laws of physics or chemistry, the answer is wrong.
You said that the other day.
Did you hear that? And I've written that down more times than I care to remember, and I've used that a number of times, because when you got a 1,500 square foot remote area design to a 0.2 density, and at the end they tell you they only need 200 gallons of water, and and that included the whole stream, something was wrong. And I don't care what the machine spit out, the answer is wrong. And unfortunately, as we have a whole new generation of young designers coming up that don't know that's wrong, and they'll argue it with you. No, it's not wrong. And you go, it has to be wrong.
Yeah, they're certified.
I just had a we just had a two-story building that had 88 pounds of friction loss to the highest point of elevation. Or excuse me, 38 pounds of friction loss. It was saying that it was 88 feet high. Elevation loss.
Two-story building.
In a two-story building. Bring up something wrong with your... So, okay, now I'll shut up.
Okay, Scott?
Well, you know, it occurs to me, as I listen to everybody in this room, the questions and Tom's comments and everybody up here, Ed said it in his preview for the introduction or whatever for tonight's show how important this really is. And we're preaching to the choir. People sitting in this room are not the people we've got a problem with.
No, they're not.
They're not the people we have a problem with. There should be 400 people in this room. And of that 400, pick a number. I don't decide percentages because, you know, it's only as good as whatever. But 90% of those people would be good. We get 5%, 4%, 1%, I don't know. There's a few individuals that are not doing it right. The companies that are represented here are good companies. They might have a bad individual. It might be a bad designer. But it might be a bad design. And, you know, I get a lot of grief for a lot of the things I do. But there really are a lot of mistakes that we get. It's not people doing bad things. I see bad things. I saw a real bad thing. I've seen a couple of bad things lately. Entire designs that were really bad, and that's why I brought them up, is because they were being submitted to a very small community, and that's what they thought was going in. That's bad. But most of what I see is mistakes. And the mistakes would save John time, and Gordy time, and Jeff time, and you guys time, if you had someone in your office review them and catch those mistakes. So, we're preaching to the choir. There's bad design, that happens once in a while. It does happen. There are mistakes. That happens a lot. I make them. Most of you make them. I don't know. I don't think Bill does. But, you know, in all seriousness, I make mistakes, but somebody in my office reads everything that goes out of my office. Gary's probably pretty frustrated because somebody in the office reads something of his that goes out in the office every time. But that's what happens. And we try to catch all those. So we're preaching to the choir. The people that are in here are concerned, and I guess what I was getting at is Ed's introduction said people are passionate. This group's passionate. And we need the rest of the people to be here to get something done on any end. So, but in one other quick thing, my national experience now, whether it's investigating things that go wrong, or teaching, or working with other individuals, whether it's James Galvino with Tyco, or Kelly Blake at UL, or John Denhart with Denhart Design, or Steven Scanliato, they're on the other coast, or Tom Gardner with Schirmer Engineering, a direct competitor. My experience is the same with all these people. They have the same comments I do. The same comments you've heard from Ed and from everybody up here. It's national. It's the same thing. People going too fast, people make mistakes, people not getting the right bid document information. It's the same thing. And my peers, you know, they see the same plans. Tony just was at the SFPE with us and took our Tom Gardner in my class, and we had engineers and designers, contractors, and all kinds of people in that class. And individually, people came up to Tom and I and said the same kind of things. Wow, this is happening here. We didn't know it was happening there. And Tom and I are going out to dinner saying, yeah, I'm seeing it with Milana. You seeing it? Yeah, we're seeing the same thing. So it isn't here, and it's not the people that are here.
No.
But somehow, we've got to work together to make change. And I don't know, the first step, I guess, is realizing it, but I don't know where we go from here.
Well, I see Jeff wants to comment on that, and I think,
John said.
I think we all clearly agree with Jeff that education is a huge part of it. I mean, I would never think of certification without prior education. And I think that's what all of us are thinking. What certification forces education. That's what we're thinking.
Not always, though, and that's the problem I have. I deal with people who are building inspectors, fire inspectors, and every kind of inspector under the sun that walk into my community and try to tell me I did something wrong after the fact. And most of them are safety inspectors. But the reality is they have a list of certifications a mile long. And you don't always have to have a whole lot of education to go take that certification test. I can take my 2-year degree in fire protection and I can walk into almost any certification test in the country with that document. And by reading a code book and getting the prescriptive cookbook method, I can probably get enough information to pass that test. But like John said, the question is, what is competency? And I'll go back to my original point. We don't need another certification. We need a means to define competency. And John in the State Fire Marshal's office needs guidelines put into place that says this is what competency means. And, like John said, and I said, years ago, people took us by the hand and showed us, what the inside of a drive valve looks like, how to reset a drive valve. Hell, you walk into a room of fire inspectors and ask them how to reset a drive valve. I'll guarantee you there's only going to be 1 or 2 of them, and they're probably my age that know how to do it. And they come out of a day when we had to go out and do it after fire runs because contractors weren't coming to do it. And that doesn't happen anymore. And the bottom line is you've got to define competency. And a certification is an end result, but it doesn't prove competency. So how do we define competency? And let's get a whole bunch of people in a room that are competent, and let's define competency. Let's not just put a bunch of questions on a piece of paper that I can go study, or I can buy the answers to, and get another certification, because I'm tired of dealing with people who are licensed, who have certifications, and alphabets after their name, 12 inches long, will walk into my office and say, you, Mr. Fire Marshal, don't know what you're talking about, but I do, because I have all these alphabets. And then they give me a design that's crap. Certification isn't the answer. Define competency. That's what John said, and that's what Gordy's saying, but he's relying on certification to do it. My experience is that certifications and licensing don't solve the problem. Education and a method to measure competency does. And that's done by a combination of education and experience, not by taking a test.
And that's where improving the test comes in.
I've got a couple comments. First one is for Gordy again. When you studied that Colorado competency thing, did you find out anything about what they required for their certification, what the state required for their final viewers?
Well, what I did find is they did have a test that a person had to take the test, and there was some minimal, criteria that they needed to have as far as experience in order to take the test. But once they passed the test, they got a certification. And then there was, continuing education. I don't remember whether it's 16 hours a year or whatever it was. I can't remember. I don't have it. It's a different file.
And then I guess the second part of my comment is competency is kind of the buzzword tonight. And if you look at, our children, we send them to school to be competent at something, math, social studies, history, whatever it would be. If they went through the classes, took the classes, that's your continuing education, but are they competent? How can you determine their competency without testing? I'm not saying that, you're right, there will always be people that could try and buy a test answer that can help. There will always be people that will try and cheat the system however they can. But if you do have some type of testing and continuing education requirement, you're getting the best of both worlds with that kind of certification. Our kids study for tests on a daily, weekly basis for school, high school, college, elementary, whatever. They are constantly being tested to be competent in what they're learning. And we as adults, maybe we've had too much testing as we grew up and we're maybe shy away from wanting to be tested at something. But if you want to get good at something, you have to educate yourself. And yes, you probably do have to pass a test to stay in business in order to do a good job of what you're trying to do.
Thank you. Paul?
I'm one of the people that you say, Paul. I've had 3 years of experience. I've tested level 4. All the modules are done. I went through the NFSA training. And I still send out stuff because I've rushed through these plans to get them out the door. You know, two of the things you sent out was my stuff.
Sorry.
It's fine. But it was a simple mistake. It was the program we used, you know. You have to input 2 places your hose string allowance. I screwed them up. You know, minor mistake, you know. I still think I sent out a good applicable plan. But when you're given 10 hours to design a job and send it off, I don't have time to review those calcs. I send them off, you know. I'd love to spend 50 hours on a job. You're just not given that. Another thing you're saying, the engineer, I don't know how many times you get plans, your HVAC's on there, everything's on there. The last thing somebody wants to do is put a sprinkler system in their building. We're not given the time to even have a chance at designing these things when they're designing the building. So now we've got to run around HVAC, all that stuff. Another thing is I think the salesmen are sending off, bidding these jobs. Oh, I missed this. So who gets it? The guy that...
Speak up a little bit, the gentleman in his back is having a hard time.
I'm soft-spoken, so...
Speak loud.
These salesmen, they bid these jobs, and they miss something. Who gets the job? The guy that misses it. So then you're forced to try to design something under bid, or to make money on it. I don't know how many times I look at a job like, a room like this, with the soffit, and I'm forced to try to put sprinklers just in the ceiling grid and try to spray underneath there, when they should have just put the sprinklers around there. But they're just, you know, these salesmen are rushed to get these jobs out too. And that's my big qualm, I guess, with everything. I don't think we're given adequate time to send out, you know, good jobs and stuff.
But you hear what you're saying, that ties in exactly what he is saying. That you design a sprinkler system without consideration for what his customer really wants.
Right.
You take orders from your estimator, who, by the way, only had 1 year of design experience, who doesn't even know what he's estimating really. But that's where the industry has gone.
And one thing I like...
And that's what these gentlemen are saying, therefore we want more oversight.
And I liked how you said nice, it's going to have pictures of a room. You know, what is this? Is this life hazardous or a hazard? I'm kind of a logic type of guy where that's where I have a hard time. Is this storage? Is this ordinary hazard? You know, how is that going to be done? I don't have problems with the spacing of the heads like you're saying. You never see that because that's easy. That's just, you know, look at it. It's the gray areas where I don't know.
You want to make another comment on that?
Well, yeah, I guess that, you know, there's the old analogy of politics and sausage. You don't want to see either one being made. There's some market forces at work here as well. I gave you the example earlier of somebody that low bid the project, they designed for the flammable liquids, but they didn't tell them they were putting in 20-foot max storage of flammable liquids, not to mention, you know, intermediate bulk containers, you know, 3 feet or 3 stacks high and stuff like that, which you could do regardless. But these things have a way of taking care of themselves when companies like myself, in this particular survey I was doing on behalf of an insurance company, which we don't normally do, But the market forces are gonna solve this problem, because they're gonna pay through the nose for their insurance until they fix this problem. Because of the size and the scope of this project, they've got a limited market. I'm probably the fifth person that's come into Logan and got a problem. And after they pay their insurance premiums for a year, they're gonna figure out how it's gonna pay for itself to fix this. So it'd be great to have a system where we can catch all these things the first time around and get them on the plans, but, life's not that easy. So it comes down to, the points made earlier about education. The more people that are aware of this, whether it's the customer, the person speccing it out, the AHJ, whoever, it's a communication issue. It's not a certification issue. It's an education and communication of everybody knowing what needs to be done and getting the right people involved. And yes, it's not always clean. It's often very messy. And I can't tell you how many times in my previous lifetime as being involved in the insurance side, we flat out told people we will not provide coverage for you because of these, we've all got the horror stories. There's thousands of them out there. And that happens on a regular basis more often than everybody in this room realizes we don't work on the insurance side. But it does happen. And these companies pay through the nose for these mistakes. And it's a learning curve. And as companies become larger, just like the small communities, that's where we see the issues is with small companies. It's not with the Fortune 500 companies that have had these issues and have fire protection engineers on staff and the safety people on staff and the relationships with the AHJs to try to avoid this thing.
Along those same lines, there is nobody taking a look at the sprinkler system for the owner or the insurance company on a 4-story residential, let's say 26-unit apartment building. It's the authority having jurisdiction. Right. So as far as the market forces, working everything out, you're right. In larger industries, that may be true.
Yeah, I'm going to that. I'm talking large industries.
Right. And I go back to, the education and certification. That, if I don't feel well, and I go to a doctor and I say, I've got a choice between two doctors, let's say, and one's got his MD degree hanging on the wall and his state certification basically there, and somebody else says, I don't have all that, but I was down in Tennessee in the hills, University. I would rely on a younger, less experienced doctor who's got a degree and a certification than one who doesn't. Because I don't have the time or the knowledge to go through all his history and do the research and see, what that experience was. So I feel you have to rely on certification that's based on some kind of testing. And I don't like tests any better than anybody else, but I think that's kind of where you're at.
You probably had enough, but I just want to make a comment that relates to both of these. I have a couple of multi-million-dollar losses going right now in residential in the metro area. Sprinkler systems froze and broke, and the same developer has 3 buildings that they've had the same problems in.
Same contractor?
No.
Same engineer designed the spec.
No, 2 of the 3, yeah. 2 of the 3 buildings are the same group, the 3rd building is a different one. But that's not the point. I asked the developer, I said, you guys do a lot of work, not just this kind of building. They're developing a whole city block in Wisconsin somewhere, and then with retail and stuff like that. I said, my goal when I started my company was to work for better bid documents, put better bid documents together. Nobody wants to pay for that now. I said, what they're paying me, what you're paying me, talking to him, is to come in and figure out what went wrong. How do I get back and get into the front end and work with you to put a better bid document together? And what he said was, and this is where this ties in, he says, well, I don't think that's going to happen, but it's going to come from insurance. And he said, because insurance is not going to continue to pay these losses. And I said, well, how are they going to do it? And he said, well, I'll tell you, they just did it. He said, I've got 2 developments I'm starting. Insurance would not let me start the development until I had insurance in place to cover everybody, including all the contractors on the job. He said, we've never had to do that before. He said, how long do you think it's going to be before that insurance person says, we want somebody reviewing the plans? So, this is where you guys, you're both talking about, and here's the, now granted, the insurance hasn't gone to anybody that I know of and said, okay, why don't you review the plans, but they would not let the project start until there was insurance to cover everybody for the kind of losses that they've been incurring. And I hear more frequently than not that the insurance is going way up just because of the losses we're starting to see with freeze-ups and sprinklers, water damage losses. So, and I think insurance may be coming back to rein in at least some aspect of it, whether they get industrial and commercial and everything else like they used to, I don't know.
But there are also insurance companies out there that are saying we don't want code compliant sprinklers in various areas because we don't want water damage, but they're willing to accept the fire damage. There's sprinkler contractor, there's insurance services offices reviews that I've gotten for buildings that are outside of the scope of NFPA standards, where they've interpolated tables that were never supposed to be interpolated. I mean, it all boils down to finance, you know, and you know, if you got a customer that's smart enough to be dealing with someone like the gentleman in the back to look out for their best interests, you know, great. But the bottom line is about 75% of the sprinkler plans that come across my desk and like number of building permits that have already been reviewed by our building department come down, and they've got an occupancy classification that's tagged onto them. They've got a sprinkler hazard that's tagged onto them, but neither the architect nor the designer knows what's going in that space. It's JB spray. Okay, well, what does JB spray do? Does JB spray paint with a flammable liquid, or does JB spray make paint sprayers out of non-combustible parts? Well, I don't know. Well, you give me the answer to that question, and then I will do your plan review. You know, it comes down to some very basic stuff. They give you that answer.
Yeah. Did you ever hear that?
Well, I could do it Burnsville, or I could do it Egan, or, you know, Gordy in Minneapolis doesn't make me do that.
22 of these up in Minnesota, and I didn't have to do that anywhere
I had a
else.
guy tell me that he didn't have to do it at Roseville when Jeff Shattuck did it. It's like, well, that was 23 years ago. By the way, I'm Jeff Shattuck. We're never going to solve those problems. You know, but the question here is competency of sprinkler plan reviewers, not to beat up on you guys and continue that. You know, how do you define competency for sprinkler plan reviewers on our end and inspectors?
Yeah. I just want to say this is one of the most provocative meetings we've had here in a long time. I've been doing this since 1980. And I think if you want 400 people show up next week, just send out the next memo saying the new law has been passed, saying we need that.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I've been sitting here listening, and I think a word that we're missing in this whole thing, and it becomes unfortunately too basic. We're looking for competency, and I think the word we're looking for is integrity. And I'm having a tough time with it. I'm listening to people tell me that they don't have time to do something that they have to do. They're given specific time to do something. Their integrity, the person that has to be responsible is going to be themselves. I thought John was going to say that when he said, I feel guilty, but it's about me. And that thought is, the answer is going to come from you. It's going to come from your own integrity and what you're doing. And Jeff, if you want somebody to be competent, I think that it has to be a combination of a competency and an integrity. I don't know we're going to solve that. I think we have to do it individually and also as a group to kind of police it. But I was not aware of some of the things that Gordy's talking about, where different communities get things done differently. You know, I've been in this business for 40 years. I've never treated one industry or one city or municipality different than another. You get what you get. You get what you paid for.
That's the way it should be.
And you are, I was just going to say, you talked about somebody being responsible for the owner. We have to be responsible for the owner. We took an obligation to do something. The city has an obligation to the owner. The designer has an obligation to the owner. The contractor has an obligation to the owner. And I know you guys are the final line of defense, and that defense shouldn't have to be there. It should be an effort that's all combined We're just seeing something that somebody did a little bit differently.
Thank you. Did you want to have a comment?
I gotta rethink it.
I know that you guys made a comment. You guys are, we're the ones that tell the owner what they have to install, what they have to do. The owner has no clue. And it's not your job to tell us that it's wrong and that they've got to protect the whole building. It's our job to tell the owners and explain and install the system right, because they don't know what they're looking at. I've had that where we've sent plans to the owner, and they're like, well, yeah, I can review it, but I don't know what I'm looking at. It looks good to me.
Now, I know that we are way past our time, it's about 8:30, although when we finally get people together to talk about a subject that is as painful as this, I think that the clock is probably not the most important thing, but I do have to look at everybody here to say, do we want to carry this conversation on a little bit longer, or are we saying that we're done? I know that you have another comment.
Well, and maybe I should make this comment because I don't end up bringing up a whole new can of worms too, but I know I know this particular survey was dealing with AHJs and plan reviewing, but I know the topic is touched that how do we certify designers that they're doing, what they need to be doing too in the state. And I've heard plenty of concerns from the AHJs that there are designers that are sending in projects that shouldn't probably be sent in, and is there a way to look at that issue too? Again, that's probably another can of worms.
Thank you. John?
I think it should be carried on by, we touched on the engineering, the contracting, and the inspections, and the installers. The installers are passing a test, the contractors are passing a test. In some cases, the AHJs, they have continuing education or made a building inspector. The ones I'm disappointed in is this organization here. This is the FPE, professional engineers that look around the room with contractors and insurance people. Why are we bringing that group in here and let this organization tackle that? The contractors have a very active group trying to tighten up their own rules on how plans and specs are being reviewed within the office. Is that correct, Chad?
Yeah, there's some changes coming that are proposed for the
Yeah,
license.
I mean, the contractors are very active in that. And along with that goes the fitters, there's installer representation on that committee. I know that the building inspectors and the code officials have their groups that this has got to be coming up at. This is the PE end of it right here. Where are they? You're preaching to the choir. I think the choir is down in the basement having coffee.
I'll let John go ahead.
Just a couple comments. One is the Fire Protection Advisory Council is active. This organization has a rep on it, happens to be Phil Walker, with Scott as his alternate or backup for that. Gordy Bates is representing FMAM on that. Ron Peel represents NFSA, and Jay Lindholm represents AFSA. So, I mean, there's membership on that. They have floated a trial balloon, I guess is the best way of explaining it, because nothing's written yet, but on developing some kind of competency certification for designers. And, if you don't meet that minimum level, then your plans have to be reviewed and signed by the ME of the company, managing employee of the company. If you're not, but it's all very much in the draft stage and still being discussed. So we've tackled the installation competency. John talked about the fitters. To some degree, we tried to tackle the design end by the managing employee. Frankly, that's not working, so now there's talk about, okay, we'll tighten up on the designer itself. Now, the third leg that I talked about before is inspectors, and we've had some interesting dialogue about that. So, I think there are some things happening. I totally with Scott and with some of the other discussions on the engineering side, but frankly, I have zero authority to fix that. Even if I wanted to, I can't. The old Alcoholics Anonymous prayer, I do what I can do. I don't try to solve all of the world's problems. And Jim, just in response to your comment, and obviously I've known you and I'm quite familiar with your company, and having known you and Bill for as long as I have, I'm sure that's the way you do business. But I can tell you without a doubt, and we've been told this, there are contractors that purposely bid jobs that the state fire marshal is not going to be the HJ because they do not want to subject themselves to our review. Now, some say we're too tough, some say we're too easy. Scott thinks we're too easy. There's a whole bunch of people that think we're too tough. And I'm sure Gordon could say the same thing. There's 66 contractors in the state. I'll bet you don't see but 20 of them.
Yeah, roughly 20. And we've been told by some contractors, they will not bid work in Minneapolis.
I only see 5 of those 20, because 15 of them won't work in my community.
They don't want to be scrutinized.
Same thing.
And we get into this all the time because they said, oh, good, it's a government project, it's a public project, so building codes will be the HJ. And they'd say, good, as long as it's not the state fire marshal, we'll bid it because it's going there, but they don't want to deal with us. And I'm sure it's the same thing in Minneapolis, St. Paul. You probably have the same in some of your contract communities that you do plan reviews for. And that is happening all the time. Now, I maybe shouldn't say this, I have a very small consulting company that I do plan reviews for some cities on the side, and just got one in over the weekend, and it's a 10-year-old water flow test. And it's a large contractor, and I know they do work with Gordon City, but for some reason they thought with this city, they could get by with a 10-year-old water flow test. And this is in a very rapidly developing industrial area. And it's like, whatever thought that they could...
You mean the water's going to get first?
I can answer that for you, though. Because in some communities, and my community is a good example, a 8 to 10-year-old water flow test may be perfectly fine. I mean, our system is all, is stable, and even in the areas that are rapidly developing, it's all computerized. So when I get I don't care how old it is. When I get it, and this is another reason to keep things at the local level and not, at some other place where they don't know their local water supply. I mean, I know what my water supply is. And I know that test that's 10 years old is good. I also know some tests that are 2 years old are not good. We've got a main that runs down Highway 55 that's a circulating main that it's I think an 18-inch or 20-inch main, and the end design on it is 55 pounds residual. And I constantly get designers that'll go out and they'll do a water flow test and they come back with 87 pounds and they want to design with 5 psi less. They send it to me and I say no, because 10 years from now that system's going to have a residual pressure of 56 to 59 pounds. So we want you to design to 55 pounds. He's not going to know that at the state level. He's not going to know that sitting in his office in Brooklyn Park. That's what he calls you. Well, yeah, but I mean, this is one of the things that you risk when you start some of these programs, because I pretty much guarantee you that if you certify fire inspectors for this aspect, there's going to be a fairly large number that are just going to say, let the state do it. Because we can't put out the money to go do, the education for the few that we do. There's pluses, but what you also have to know is be careful what you wish for. There's minuses. There's nobody that knows my water system better than me. There's nobody that knows my fire department operations better than me. And there's things in the fire code that need to be done because of the way our fire department operates, because of the way our equipment is. And it's not the same in Minneapolis, it's not the same in Maple Grove, and the state will be the first one to tell you, they don't look at fire lanes, they don't look at fire hydrants, they don't look at fire department connections, it's a local issue. But they are fire code requirements, and that's what you're getting when you get the local inspector looking at it. So there's trade-offs both ways, it's kind of be careful what you wish for.
I've got a response to John.
Okay.
It's okay.
No, I think it's perfectly fine, but if I see a lot of people sort of stretching and sitting up and heading for the door, then we're...
And I'm ready.
You already got us away from Halloween candy.
Well, I'm ready to keep us some more.
Yeah.
I gotta make sure my kids are home safely, but I agree with what John just said. But I think, my feeling is, it's not the FPEs that are the issue. The FPEs, and we don't have a lot of them, aren't the ones that are doing the bad stuff. It's the MEs and the others that shouldn't be doing it.
That's what I was getting at.
But to carry that one step further, it's not, because it's not the FPEs doing the design.
Right.
I've gotten one design in 15 years from someone who's an FPE.
Right. But the State Board of Architects and Engineers, I think 2 years ago, put together a great big group, and both Dr. Pearson and I attended. He was right in the middle of it. And they were looking at the design-build issue and the state law regarding licensed professional engineers and design-build projects. And the Attorney General was there with a ruling on the sprinkler contractor law and a ruling on the electricians. They've got a similar law, like, whatever, it's not a law, but rule. And they had an attorney there, and his was different than the Attorney General's. And so what this group was trying to do was say, you know what, we got to have registered engineers on all these projects, because that's what state law says. By the time they got done knocking each other out with attorneys, it ended. It hasn't met again. And my understanding, and Rich's understanding, is that it does require a professional engineer to design a system, mechanical, electrical system, in a design-build project. But the State Board of Architects and Engineers is the only one that can enforce that. So if we come in here and talk about the FPEs, we're preaching to the choir again. You're right, this is the FPE group, and but we don't reach enough people to get outside of our FPE group here, I don't think. I mean, that's my personal opinion of this group, that it would do a lot of good.
Do we even have an FPE license right now?
No, there's no discipline. No, it's not licensed.
I mean, because, you get back to certifications again. I mean, you have to have general knowledge in the discipline you practice, and then that law says that you have to be competent in the area that you're practicing in.
Education and experience.
Education experience. But the reality is, when I get something from a licensed engineer, generally, it doesn't include pipe and pipe sizes. It does not include a set of calculations. It does not include cut sheets. It includes the general ceiling grid with some sprinkler head locations. It has a bid spec that's stamped on the front of their plan, and it says, shop drawings to be submitted for approval by the contractor. So, where did your state licensing for an FPE or an engineer to stamp that document get you? It got you right back to the people who ultimately end up responsible for it, and that's you and I. So.
Actually got you back to Mr. Campbell's statement. The integrity of the engineer and architect involved. They don't have the keys to involve somebody that knows what they're doing. Oh, is it going to cost that much?
Oh, yeah.
We'll put our performance back.
Absolutely. Did you have a comment? I saw it earlier, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, you pretty much just answered my question. My question is, I'm a student studying to be a fire protection engineer. And my understanding of the way it works is I have to take my EIT, become an engineering training, and then spend 5 years under a PE before I can get my PE. And then once I have my PE, my license is on the line on every drawing that I submit. So if I'm designing a sprinkler system and there's a problem with it, you end up with an actual problem with the pipes freezing up, and something breaks, there's damages. That could be like a fine or a loss of my license for me. And so when I'm stamping my PE stamp on there, that's my license every time on the line. And that if it's a drawing that somebody under me did, it's still my license on the line. And same when I'm training to get my P, it's the guy above me's license on the line for every drawing. So where's the enforcement coming in there?
There's some realities that I'd like to, and I'm not here to criticize another state agency, that's not my goal, but personally, I've sent 5 complaints to the State Board of Architecture and Engineering. I've never even got a follow-up phone call on any one of them. Our office has sent equally that number more. I'm not familiar, it's probably happened, but in my little domain, the fire protection and fire and life safety, because I'm talking about architects too that design means of egress and other things. Some of these were serious deficiencies. I'm not sure that I have ever seen, I cannot recall ever seeing any disciplinary action being taken for any design. As a matter of fact, I'm not familiar with, and I used to deal in the school environment where they always had an architect and engineer. I'm not even sure that I've ever heard of an architect or engineer even paying any kind of damages, errors and omissions or anything. And I've seen dozens, if not hundreds of major screw-ups. Now, I understand they took some engineer's license for a bridge that collapsed, and it wasn't the 35W bridge, it was the Lake Street Marshall Bridge years ago. But other than that, what I see the State Board of Architecture and Engineering going after is non-licensed people practicing the trade.
Right.
Where it's Bob's Lumberyard, and I hope nobody here owns a lumberyard, it's Bob, but who designs a building. They'll readily go after that person, but
They don't go after their own.
I don't know that they go after and their own.
Building officials and fire officials who don't require PE stamps on plans.
Yeah, they'll go after us.
We have been taken to task, and I know my city has, years and years and years ago. And, you know, these things were discussed when we did the original, sprinkler licensing. I mean, we discussed the certification and licensing of fire officials. And to be honest with you, the reason why we didn't do it was you guys didn't want to have the increased turnaround in your plans and permits. And you guys didn't want to have the increased permit fees that went along with having Scott Futrell do your design, and your plan review. It was the industry, actually, that said, let's not do that, because it was going to make the cost of fire protection systems not only not affordable, but not profitable for you guys to install. And, these were the words that we were given in roundtable discussions about why we should not do things. So, to be blunt, that's the history. And that's the other flip side of the coin. But, you get back to, like he said, realism, reality.
If you're interested, the State Board is having a regulatory changes meeting a week from, or next Monday. That'd be fun.
Well, some of the, when we're saying the FPE, back years ago, they were just PEs.
Yeah.
And
It still is.
It still is.
It still is. The state of Minnesota does not have an
And
FPE.
they're not competent to do it. And that's why the industry fought that. Because, matter of fact, I'm a dinosaur in the business. I used to design, engineers would come to our firms, and I'd be designing the documents for them. And that was a standard practice a lot. I still get calls I get calls from FPEs asking me questions because they're out of touch with the nuts and bolts of the systems. So they'll call me. I've had fire marshals call, same reasons, ask my opinions on things. Well, that's all fine. That's what you got to do. If you don't know the answer, or if you need help, you find out from somebody or in book somebody. So that's the whole thing. The PEs, like I say, that's why it was fought. They didn't have the competency to do fire protection systems.
And that's the biggest thing that we have to solve the problems that Corey's talking about. And communities have to do it. I mean, when we were doing the design for the Senex Fire Estates project, I didn't know how to do that. I mean, I knew how to read the different standards, and I knew what they were giving me didn't work. But I'm talking about 28-foot storage of one-quart plastic 3B containers. And the original the document that we came up for an alternate method material was designed off of the fire protection, NFPA's fire protection handbook and the American Society of Engineers handbook and a whole bunch of other things. And when I went back and did the research in all of those, geez, motor oil, class 3B liquid, is not a whole lot different than any other combustible material as far as the literature that's out there. And you sit down and you talk to Scott, and you talk to Rich Pearson, and they say, well, yeah, until you heat it up and have an ignition. Then it's the same as gasoline. Well, it doesn't say that in those books. So our original stuff didn't work at all. Plus, the Uniform Fire Code grabbed tables out of NFPA 30 for steel containers, and nobody knew that they were no good until Rich Pearson and I started doing some stuff around and we're talking about this, and Rich is doing some digging, and Rich says, hey, you know what? This don't work at all. Well, that really blew the lid off of a whole bunch of stuff in the code. So, I mean, it's difficult to do, but, you know, like he said, you gotta say, I don't know the answer to this question, and you gotta tell the building owner, you're gonna have to shell out some money and hire an FPE. And then even when you do that, it's almost impossible, because we had 3 different persons that gave us design work that had worked for, you know, Pittsburgh Paints, Shell Oil, Amoco, and they were wrong. You know, and we told them, go to the Shermers of the world, go to the people who are, you know, look at the NFPA 30 committee and find out who's working on this stuff and call them and ask them, you know, where do I get an engineer that knows the answer? And like I said, it took us 12 years to come up with a solution. You know, but the reality was, I said, I don't know the answer, and I'm not going to make you do something and spend $2.5 million on a system that I don't know works. In the end, it was 2.3 million, I think, something like that. But we know we have a system that works and that the commodities that are underneath it are going to be protected. But you got to say, I don't know the answer, and you got to go out and get that help.
Do we want to each make a final comment before we call it a day? It's almost 9 o'clock.
I said my stuff.
You're done? Okay. You know, I would like to say that I'm really impressed with the level of thoughtful discussion that we've had tonight. We haven't had anybody yelling at each other. We haven't had any unreasonable things said.
But we still haven't got an answer.
We haven't got an answer.
I want the answer.
I don't know that we have come up with an answer tonight, but I think we've had a very open and reasonable discussion. It's very impressive, and I think, you know, when you look nationwide, in many ways, Minnesota is very much a leader in many of these issues. And that's why, Gordy, you haven't found a lot on the internet, because the best comes from here.